Hey there, plant parents. We're back at it again. My name is Brad and welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to discuss a common problem that many plant parents have, yellowing leaves. If you've noticed yellowing leaves on your plant, don't worry, I've got you covered. Today, we're going to discuss the common reasons why you have those yellowing leaves and also solutions to help bring those plants back to their green glory. So, let's go! Yellowing leaves can be a sign that something isn't quite right with your plant's health. Let's discuss some of the potential reasons why you might have those yellowing leaves, and also let's find those solutions. Here is one of my favorite plants, the Polea. You'll notice that while I do have green growth up top, I do have a yellowing leaf. So I want to use this plant as an example as we go through the steps of troubleshooting and finding those solutions. First things first, let's talk about watering. Overwatering is one of the most common culprits that leads to yellowing leaves. Excess water can suffocate the roots, which ultimately would lead to root rot and potentially yellowing and wilting of the leaves. Make sure you're following your proper watering routine when it comes to your plants. Different plants have different needs, so make sure that you also know what the specific needs are. This Polea, for instance, it likes for the top inch of its soil to be dry before I water it. Also, because I'm in a terracotta pot, the soil tends to dry out more quickly, so I also need to water more frequently. Other plants like to have their soil kept evenly moist, otherwise they will run into the same issue of yellowing leaves. It's also important to understand that both overwatering and underwatering can look very similar. The best way to figure out if you're underwatering or overwatering is to either stick your finger into the soil or to lift the root ball up out of the pot and see if the bottom of the root ball is wet, dry, or somewhere in between. Another factor that can lead to yellowing leaves is a nutrient deficiency. Plants like and they need to be fed. Plants require things such as nitrogen, iron, phosphorus, potassium, things along that nature. So make sure that you're feeding your plants with a well-balanced fertilizer. It's also important to understand that different plants have different nutrient needs. When you are assessing what to fertilize your plants with, make sure that you're looking at the NPK value of the fertilizer. The N represents nitrogen, the P represents phosphorus, and the K represents potassium. These ratios are important to understand because some plants require higher nitrogen while other plants require less nitrogen and more phosphorus. So make sure that you're feeding your plants regularly and make sure that you understand the different types of fertilizer that are available so you can then feed your plants with those fertilizers. If you like videos like this and would like to see more videos about houseplant tips and tricks, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. It's totally free and would mean a lot. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. One thing that isn't really talked about enough when it comes to fertilization is the pH level of your soil. Depending on what your pH level is, it might inhibit your plant's ability to take up the nutrients that you have in your fertilizer. So sometimes a soil test might be appropriate so you can know what your pH value is. Another thing to note is over-fertilizing can cause yellowing leaves as well. So just like with watering, both over and under fertilization can lead to your yellowing leaves, so you should adjust accordingly. For this Polea, I fertilized regularly with a granular, slow-release fertilizer. This fertilizer I've used for quite some time, so I don't believe that's the issue that caused this yellow leaf. That's right here. Another thing that can cause yellowing leaves on your plants are pests. Pests like spider mites, mealybugs, and thrips can wreak havoc on your houseplants. Some of these pests will sap up the nutrients from the leaves, causing them to turn yellow. So it's important to inspect your plants regularly to see if there are any pests. If there are any pests, there are a couple of ways that you can treat for pests. One way to treat for pests is to use neem oil. The problem with neem oil, however, is that sometimes plants' foliage can be too delicate, and that too can cause damage. Another thing that you can do is treat with a combination of dish soap and baking soda mixed with 1 gallon of water. Typically the ratio is 1 tablespoon of baking soda with 1 tablespoon of dish soap for 1 gallon of water. This can be sprayed on the foliage and wiped. That will sometimes work when it comes to treating for pests. If you want to go all out and treat for pests and make sure you get to the root of the issue, you can use an insecticide. Insecticides are probably the most efficient and effective way to get rid of pests if they're damaging your foliage. So again, make sure you're inspecting your leaves for little pests crawling around and make sure that there are no pests on your leaves. If there are pests or if you see signs of pest damage, it would be advisable to treat as soon as possible. There are a couple of ways that you can inspect for pests on your plants. The first thing that you can do, and probably the easiest thing to do, is to visually look at your plant to see if you see any such pests on your plants. Another thing you can do is look for things that pests typically leave behind. A sticky residue, webbing, or leaf damage are key indicators that you might have pests on your plants. Lighting plays a significant part in leaf health. Too much light or too little light can cause the yellowing of leaves. Make sure that you're placing your plant in an appropriate spot for their needs. This palea, for instance, likes bright indirect light. If I were to give it too little light, for instance, it would have yellowing leaves. Too much light, you would also see those yellowing leaves, but for different reasons. Too much light typically will cause a leaf burn or leaf scorch marks on your leaf, which would then look like yellowing. Too little light ultimately leads to the plant yellowing and wilting. You'll notice that for this palea, the yellowing leaf is on the right side while the other green leaves are on the left side. This, I believe, is the reason for my yellowing leaf. I believe that due to uneven light distribution and not rotating my plant frequently has caused a yellowing leaf to occur. Root health is also a critical and often overlooked component when it comes to yellowing leaves. It's important to examine your roots regularly to make sure that they aren't exhibiting signs of root rot, for instance. It's fairly easy to examine your root ball. Simply lift the root ball out of the pot to examine the health of the roots. Are the roots mushy? That's the first thing that you should look for. You should also check to see how root bound your plant is. If your plant is root bound, you will typically have uneven water distribution when you're watering your plant. Water will more than likely only flow through the outside of your root ball and not cause the root ball to be fully saturated, which will lead to underwatering. Another thing to check for when examining your root ball is to make sure that your plant is in well-drained soil if it requires it. The easiest way to check to see if your plant is in well-drained soil is to pour water into the pot. How quickly does the water go from the top to the bottom? If it takes an excessive amount of time, then it might be time to amend your soil. If, however, the water freely flows to the bottom, you're good to go. Here's a bonus tip. Some plants do benefit from increased humidity. While I don't believe it's a necessary purchase, a humidifier can be beneficial to increase the humidity levels around the plant if you find that in your home you have low humidity. Some people also suggest misting the leaves or putting a pebble tray underneath your plant in order to increase the relative humidity around it. Misting the leaves, however, can cause things such as rot within the actual foliage, so that I would not recommend. A pebble tray on the bottom of your plant can be beneficial to increase the relative humidity around your plant. However, it would not be nearly as impactful as buying a humidifier. Again, I don't believe it's a necessary purchase to make. If you have one, that's great and should be used in order to increase the relative humidity for your plant. If you don't have a humidifier, I wouldn't recommend going out and purchasing one immediately. Instead, what I would do is use the previous tips to see whether or not that will help to reverse your yellowing leaves. Certain diseases can also cause yellowing leaves. Certain fungal and viral diseases can cause this yellowing to occur. If you find that you have a fungal disease, the treatment is very similar for the treatment for pests. You can mix 1 tablespoon of dish soap with 1 tablespoon of baking soda, spray the foliage, and wipe it down. Another thing that you can do is go all out and purchase a fungicide. The fungicide might be the best solution if you find that your fungal disease has spread over a lot of your foliage and isn't just isolated to 1 or 2 leaves. If you have a viral disease, however, unfortunately, these steps won't work. Viral diseases are typically systemic, and therefore it might be the end of your plant. But please use the previous treatments to see if that helps reverse any of the yellow foliage that you see on your plant. Lastly, don't forget about regular maintenance of your plant. Leaves have a natural life cycle. The older the leaf gets, the more susceptible it is to becoming yellow. It's just how it is. As long as your plant is pushing new, healthy green foliage, and as long as you have checked for things such as water, nutrient deficiency, and light, chances are the yellowing is just a part of that natural progression that the leaf is taking. If you care about the aesthetic of your plant, you can remove the yellowing leaf. This is beneficial because instead of the plant using its energy and directing it to a yellowing leaf, it will then instead divert that energy into new, lush growth. Remember, yellowing leaves are a way for the plant to communicate. By taking the appropriate actions necessary, you can help restore the vitality of your plant sooner rather than later. Keep in mind that every plant is unique and has specific needs and requirements. Every plant is different, so be sure to treat them as such. If you found this video helpful, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more houseplant tips and tricks. Happy gardening, and I'll see you on the next video.